I'm so glad today to have a new episode of the podcast series Connecting Social Research to Society. I am with you, Sari Hanafi, Professor of Sociology at the American University of Beirut and the founder of the Portal for Social Impact of Scientific Research in/on the Arab world, the portal called Athar. Today, I'm really honored to have with us Rigas Arvanitis. Hello, Rigas.
Hello, Sari.
Yes. So Rigas is not only a friend; is a dear friend. He is a Franco-Greek sociologist, a research director of Institute of Research for Development (ERD) in France. Also director since 2019 in the Center of Population and Development. It's based on ERD and University Paris Descartes. So he is the director of the center, but also, his career is amazing and rare, I would say, during this podcast series. We didn't have somebody who have a field experience in Latin America, Venezuela and Mexico, in China, in the Arab countries, and at the same time work on Africa. So almost, in addition, of course, he is based in France and situated in the French field and in European field of science policy, sociology of science, anthropology of science. By the way, he has been an chief editor of Revue d'Anthropologie des Connaissances, so Journal of Anthropology of Knowledge, from 2007 to 2014. So, but if you like, I am interviewing Rigas today because really of his amazing experience in the Arab world. I would say he has an amazing project, Esteem. We will talk about it, where he had experience in many Arabic countries, but Lebanon particularly, it was really very important for his research. And for us, I would say, we were honored at the American University of Beirut to have him as a visiting professor during 3 years, where again we publish our book, Knowledge Production in the Arab World, The Impossible Promise, which really it has been the outcome of a thorough research. We will talk about it. He has many publications, by the way, but if I will stop in one or two, I would select, for instance, research collaborations between Europe and Latin America, mapping and understanding partnership. So he co-edited with Jean Gaillard and was published in Édition des Archives Contemporaines. I will stop here because you will discover more Rigas through the interview. Again, Rigas, so happy being in Paris to talk with you.
Thank you for the good words.
Yeah. So Rigas, first, can you tell us, you are Greek and then French. Why did you decide to study economics and then you moved to sociology? Can you tell us about the time in the
I was
80s?
I was born in 58. So when I was the age I finished school, I was in the last days of the dictatorship in Greece, living in Greece. And we were very much a generation that was marked by the fact that we grew under the dictatorship. And the last years were the years of the rebellion of the students. And I was very much engaged into this, as many children of my age at that time. So we were very much politicized. I come from a family that was talking a lot of politics. My father had been in prison because of his political opinions, and so there is this background. And I'm always saying that I'm just a project of my father, and my father, in fact, wanted me to be a political person. That's what he really wanted me to become, which was really what he wanted to become himself, in fact, as many fathers. What at that time the discourse was that if you want to do good politics, you need to study economics, because economics was the infrastructure, as you remember, the vocabulary of the Marxist analysis, and all the rest was superstructure, but the infrastructure was economics. So he told me that I should study economics. I was not very decided, so I began studying. Also, he told me, you go and study not in Greece, but in France, because I was fluent in France. My mother is French, and at home we were bilingual. So I went to study economics in France, and I hated it. For many reasons that have not to do with the content of economics, but I was not at ease with this economic.
You find it so classic. I mean,
and it was not answering to the question I was having, like why the left has been a success or not, how dictatorships become, what is political relations between nations, questions of a young guy who was looking at society at large. And I think anti-imperialism was really what was gathering this generation. And when you were in Greece or in the Mediterranean at large at that time, the US were very dominant. So anti-imperialist was anti-US really at that time. And so you needed to explain that how the biggest country in the world, the richest, the more powerful, was so much dominating the world. What was really the implication of the Americans into the Middle East? What was their implication into European politics? All this was like the mysteries to discover as a young student. So very quickly I looked to do other things than economics, and I fell in love by pure chance, in fact, with Bruno Latour, who was, to say just 1 year before, I was studying the less economic part of economics called History of Economic Ideas. So I did a master's dealing with the production of economists analyzed by bibliometrics, which is the statistical analysis of the publications. So I discovered and then I also discovered anthropology of economics. I read Marshall Sahlins, I read all the books that were dealing with the history of society and economics and I had a teacher which was Alain Caillet, who's a sociologist, working very much on these issues. So something opened there, open questions. And one of the things that I found picking in various places was the classes of a young guy called Bruno Latour. Bruno was at that time assistant to Professor Jean-Jacques Salomon at the Conservatoire des Arts et Métiers, something that everybody has forgotten. But Bruno could not be the assistant of anybody anyway, so very quickly he became himself. He left the Conservatoire des Arts et Métiers 1 year or two after I met him, and I followed him. I like if I was under his protection. So I went to the School of Mines, where I worked for 3 years with Michel Calon and Bruno Latour at that time.
So this is before the PhD.
This is before the PhD. So my first job was a contract with the Ministry of Research, At that time, François Mitterrand had just won the elections, so there was the big transformation of the research system in France, and there was a lot of people studying evaluation of research, new science policies, new policies in development of technology. Economics of innovation was also growing as a domain, so suddenly economics became interesting, to my eyes at least. So there was all this, and my first contract was, Rigas, why don't you do something on what quantitative indicators we have
In the United States. This is your first report.
just
No?
everywhere.
Yeah.
What quantitative indicators can we use in evaluation of research? So I did a report on that, and they told me that's 400 pages, it's too much. So you
My
do a
God.
short one.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wrote a shorter one, and they told me, and by the way, how do they evaluate research in the US? So I had my first trip in the United States, where I went to the National Science Foundation, to the NIH, the National Institute of Health, and also to one or two universities to see people working on these topics.
Yeah.
And so I came back with a report on evaluation of research in the US.
In 1983.
Something like that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
are right. In 1983. So, so after that, Michel Callon one day calls me and he tells me, oh, we had begun also a project with Michel Callon and Bruno Latour on the evaluation of research programs. At that time, France had decided to dedicate a part of its budget for research to national programs, priority programs, one on biotechnology and new materials, on microelectronics, on and so on and so forth. So, so the thing was, how do we evaluate this thing that does not depend upon one institution, but a conjunction of institutions? And that was really a new policy. It's something very common today, but at that time was very rare to have one national program. Remember that the European framework programs, the first one is in 1984, and precisely the model that was growing in Europe was to have national programs that gather a small portion. At that time in France was 10% of the research budget, and that small portion was supposed to be like the driving force for the research.
And in the specific niche area, or
in
any
all
area?
disciplines.
In all disciplines.
In discipline where you decide to have a priority. So you have space technology, biotechnology, public health, whatever. So you have various programs. So we were studying supposedly...
So you are really so lucky, I see from your trajectory.
Incredible.
You finish your BA and you go directly to do not a donkey work of research assistant, collecting biography but you do your own research and reports and
that's very much thanks to these people. For example, Michel Callon or Philippe Roqueplot, who died last year, who was the director of the evaluation branch of this Office of Evaluation that was at the Ministry of Research, who told me, okay, Michel Callon told me that what you do is good work, so why don't you go to the US to do a report for us? I don't think this freedom to decide and just dedicating one salary for 1 year for a young guy just getting out of university to do this. I think I was lucky enough to have...
And Rigas, it's very interesting. And since 80s, I mean, France see United States as a model, want to understand, to replicate.
Clear. That's very clear. That's very clear. And one of the classes of Jean-Jacques Salomon we were talking before was precisely how the US, after the Second World War, modeled all the research systems around, so in the worldwide. So yes, there is this very view that the US, maybe not the model, but it's clearly the most important. So we need to know how it works there if we want to do something at least as good as that. So I finished this work with them. We were doing this work ongoing with Michel Callon and Bruno Latour, And then at some point, Michel calls me and tell me, okay, we have a meeting tomorrow. But before that, somebody called me. There's this institution called Orstom. You know it? And I said, yeah, I know. Because I knew all the French institutions. In 1 year, I had a seminar at the School of Mines. Every week, we had one national institute coming to explain us how they were doing their evaluation.
Oh, wow.
So we had the CNRS people, we had INSERM, we had INRA, we had some of the schools, Institut Pasteur. Orstom was one of these institutions. Orstom is a very strange inheritor of the colonial history of France. It was created in 1943, which is not a very good year to be created in France. And then it was built upon specific disciplines oriented to the tropical world. So the idea was to study in a purely scientific way, not in order to exploit only agricultural sciences or husbandry or whatever, this kind of things, but just from a purely scientific point of view, how to study the tropical environments. And it's probably the first environmentally oriented research institute in the world that was really dedicated to that for the tropical world.
So this is the difference with the SOAS.
Yes.
For instance, SOAS was really for colonial. It's a colonial science,
and only social sciences.
And only social sciences. While the Orstom is the environment.
Natural sciences.
Yeah.
It studies soils, plants, animals, diseases. So you have the biggest specialist in France of soils was specialized on the tropics. Monsieur Aubert, for example, was a specialist of tropics. And it's precisely a soil scientist who had the idea to create a sociological unit to study sociologically how science is working. And so they opened a position inside Orstom, that strange institution. And we were some 20 candidates that were presented there, and there's an examination, and I just entered because of the examination. No? I won't tell you all the story about that, but the interesting thing is that the research unit that was created in a period where Orstom was becoming from a colonial institution in a post-colonial institution. And that involved changing the way things were decided inside the research organization. So instead of being decision of the big chief, there was departments, discussions at the level of the departments, heads of department had power that could decide. The head of department called Roland Vast was a sociologist that had a PhD in sociology, and he was a polytechnician. So he was a higher engineer of the French state, but never did engineering, and he wanted always to study sociology. And when he was hired some 10 years before me by Orstom, he was sent in 1965, I think, 68 maybe, in Madagascar. And there was many French young scientists, social scientists at that time, and also natural sciences in Madagascar. And the idea was that they were participating, these young people thought they were participating to the consolidation of the new independent state of Madagascar. But they had all a defect, they were all communists. So the direction general of Orstom decided to put them on a side, to punish them, in fact, and not to allow them anyhow to go in a foreign country more. So Roland Vast and his wife decided to take a leave from the institution and go to live where? In Algeria. Algeria is like the enemy of France at that time. It was just independent also, and they were studying, helping also an independent state. So these kind of people were the ones that took power with François Mitterrand, and this. They were not all communists, contrary to what I said just before. Very far from that.
So you have a certain McCarthyism in France.
Clearly, there was a very clear and yeah, at least a fright of what the left could do, and one,
especially in a sensitive institution like Orstom.
yeah, which
Dealing
worked in
with-
a foreign country.
Yeah, yeah, foreign-
exactly,
yeah, yeah.
exactly. And Guy Camus was a very dictatorial director, and so at that time the new director was a person absolutely fantastic called Alain Ruelland, who took the lead of this new institution and changed, when all the research institutions in France changed in 1984, the new law on research, which is still the one that's governing the French research system, was drafted. And Mr. Ruelland said, okay, it's okay for the Department of Social Sciences to have a team on the sociology of science, but I want the guy who comes there to go to Brazil. The reason was that Alain Ruelland was born in Brazil. He was a soil scientist, born in Brazil, and he thought that Brazil was the most interesting country in the world. So when I was hired, I said, would it be possible to they told me, I wanted to go to work to Africa, and they told me, no, you go to work to Latin America. And they didn't tell me really it was Brazil, they told me Latin America. Of Latin America, I only knew Chile, and in 1974 there was a dictatorship, and that was the only thing I really knew about Latin America. So I decided to work. We drafted a sort of program of what could be the next topics of this new research unit, and we did a small colloquium. It was called Practices and Policy of Science, and that was also the name of the unit we created. And I asked, since I had to go to Latin America, I had drafted a program to go to Côte d'Ivoire in Africa, and they told me, no, you will not work on fish and on Côte d'Ivoire. What's that? You go to Latin America and you'll seek a topic there. Okay. Please, can you allow me to have one travel in Latin America? And
Can I draw an analogy in the historian of Saint-Simonian movement? When one of disciples of Saint-Simon wanted to go to Egypt, he told him, no, please don't. This is the passé of the humanity. Go to the north of Europe, here where it will be the future civilization. And this disciple who disobey and went to Egypt. So it looks like Rigas, like in the mind of this guy, that Latin America really, where the major issue at stake will happen.
Something of this kind happens. In fact, when the socialists take power in the 80s in France, one of the things that really changed was the orientations as far as African and foreign policy was done. And one of the things they decided, for example, for research and Orstom, was to open new research fronts. Latin America was one of them. The other one was India. And there was a whole research project on India that marched at that time. With Maxence was the head of that thing. There was a whole new topics like industrialization of Africa, which was not at all a topic studied before. There was also topics like the economics of poverty, which was also a front opened at that time more generally, not only in Orstom in France. So yeah, this period in the 80s is opening new fronts.
Okay.
And so Latin America is there. So I go to Brazil and Venezuela. Why Venezuela? Because there was this lady called Ebe Vesuri, who now has published even her memoirs.
Our dear friend, an anthropologist of first class.
Exactly. And
whose husband was tortured and I
Exactly.
think died in the
Ebbe
prison.
Vesuri was an anthropologist who had done her studies in Oxford, and she introduced science studies in Latin America. Really, that was her job. And at that time, she was not very well known. She had written a paper on science in Latin America, a sort of generic paper in the leading journal at that time, Social Studies of Science. And I wrote a paper to Ebbe. Please, Ebbe, Mrs. Vesuri, could I meet you? At that time was letters. And I received a letter before going to Latin America telling me, look, we are very glad to meet you, but we are fed up with people who do their PhDs here and leave, and that's it. We are not going to be your next fieldwork.
Wow.
Very strong, very,
Yeah.
very strong. So I said, I want to meet that lady.
Yeah,
Someone who's so frankly
Yeah.
putting it the limits,
Yeah.
no, what she was ready to negotiate with anyone.
Yeah.
She didn't know me, she didn't know what I said. She only had a small CV with 3 lines,
Yeah.
which was what I had only as a CV then. And so I went to Brazil, and that was 1984, and you have to remember that it's the first year of democracy after the dictatorship in Brazil. So the country was in a turmoil. And it was very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I met fantastic persons, sociologists. I really felt very close to people like Simon Schwarzman, for example, who afterward played a big role in Brazil, or many other persons. And I went also to Brasilia. I went to Sao Paulo, to Campinas, to Rio de Janeiro, and Manaus. And then I arrived in Caracas, and for some bizarre reason, the reasons why you like a city are very obscure, and I liked it immediately.
Yeah.
It was very violent, very hot, very disorganized, chaotic. And I arrived in the office of Mrs. Vesuri, and she told me, what you say there is very interesting to study with on the science dynamics in Latin America. Why not? I have a guy there on first floor who's looking for a colleague to work with him. I went to see him, and he was Arnoldo Pirella, just coming back from England, where he had his master's degree in economics. And he said, yeah, I have a project there on evolution of innovation in Latin America. And what's interesting you? I said, that was not at all the topics I was thinking of. So I said, no, what interesting thing is this kind of discourse of the necessity to do applied research for development.
Yeah.
And we were very critical about that, because precisely the post-colonial Ostom institution was very much against this idea of doing things for development. We've worked for development, but not directly. We are very critical against policies of development.
Oh.
So
I
I
hear
said,
that.
yeah, so okay, we study development. Let's see what's this mantra that you have to do applied research. And so I did a thesis after that on this topic. But really, I stayed in Venezuela with this Arnoldo Pirella, who's a friend now, who wrote a history of economic history of Venezuela, by the way, and much later. But we worked as a team, 4 persons, for 4 years. And we explored for the first time economics of innovation in the country, really. So that was, we did also the first innovation survey by questionnaire. And it was interesting because I began knowing people in many other places in Latin America, not only Venezuela. At that time, Venezuela is a rich country, very well endowed in terms of universities and research. It has a very large research center that does very fundamental research called IVIC. It has trained a lot of experts in economics and planification of economics, as it was called at that time, that worked for the Economic Commission of Latin America of the United Nations, which is based in Santiago in Chile. They were the school of this ECLAC at that time, which is called CEPAL in Latin America. And so I was in a sort of very privileged environment, which was that Center for Development Studies of the University of Venezuela, and we did really this developing this topic on economics of innovation, which was taking me away from my original topics really. Yeah. But I tried to maintain it. Came back to France after 4 years. And they told me, you know what, you need to have a PhD if you want to follow up your as researcher of the institute. And in 1990 was a year when they had changed the legal system for the PhDs in France. So I had to, if I didn't want, regime. I had to be to do it in the year. Otherwise, I had to re-inscribe me in a PhD plan for 3 years, and it was taking me 4 years later. So Pierre Tripier, who unfortunately died last week, was my director of research. Really what I did was to use all the material I had gathered in the last 4 years, and I wrote this thesis on research. And that brought me immediately in contact with other Latin Americans in Mexico in particular, where I worked with this master program on economics of innovation, technological change it was called at that time. And I stayed there for 6 years, in fact. And it was interesting for, I think, first, I taught in Spanish all that time, so I really became fluent.
This is what I mean, I notice, and it's amazing that you learn every time you are in a context, you learn the language.
A little bit.
Not in the Arab world, a little bit in the Arab world, but in China.
In China, well. Although I forgot all my basic Chinese. But really what I tried to, in Latin America, was really very, I think it's because Spanish is easier to learn when you speak French. Moreover, I was very much interested by the literature also, the cultural environment of Latin America. So this is, Mexico has been...
Can I say something? I mean, what I notice from your writing, Rigas, and I have the pleasure of reading you many of writing, that you have never been a narrow scoped researcher, although you are working often in I would say in narrow topic. For instance, you are looking for science evaluation, you are etc. But you have always extremely beautiful introduction showing how the intersection between science system with society. I mean, always you give us a message that you don't understand science system outside of society, and this is why if I look to your knowledge production, always showing us that there is attempt of standardization and institutionalization, and sometimes is inevitable this institutionalization, which correlate with the professionalization, and the but is very important. The but that you need to create your national science system. Okay, so
yes,
this is how I read.
Well, this is very true. One of the qualities of having traveled in Latin America at that time, only there. No, we are talking in the 80s and 90s, spending most of the 90s in Mexico, was that the context of the country. There's two ideas. First of all, the context of the country is determining the way you will decide upon if you give or not a priority to research and knowledge production. And I think Mexico was a good case because you had from very early a lot of scientists, but the institutional system was not very much in favor of research.
Oh, I see.
It was not a country with a lot of research, although it was a quite good country in many other areas. I think it was very much related to the fact that the priorities of the elite were very much oriented towards the humanities, towards the arts.
Rigas, do you remember the first workshop we met with Roland Vast, who
That
organized
was
it?
precisely.
And the major message I learned there, when Latin American talk about science, where is the big hurdle of science? And at that time they said the Marxism. And why the Marxism? They were not a right-wing people, because Marxism thought that it become a science, and this science can replace sociology and economics. And it was very difficult, or political, social science in general. Is it in this spirit that you
It
are
is.
talking that is research? I mean, at least in social science research, it's not emerging because of the.
Social science research emerged, but on its own terms, different from the ones that existed in other countries. What is interesting also from that period, and that's why with Roland Vast we organized this project, was called Scientific Communities in the Developing World. This program allowed us to do these workshops. You went. There was 2 of these workshops, quite difficult to organize, by the way. And it was also the first time where we found out that the priority for research is very different from one country to another. And that relates to what Roland had called it a pact for science.
Yeah,
The pact for science is the idea that there's something implicit,
Yeah.
where you say, okay, we are giving you some liberty to do research in the topics that you want,
Yeah.
and we know that you will bring us in exchange prosperity because you do that.
Yeah.
But then the connection between research and prosperity is very difficult to demonstrate to
Yeah.
begin with. And
Especially directly.
it's always indirect. And then there's thousands of ways that you transmit knowledge from an academic environment to a non-academic use.
Yeah.
It's precisely the central question about development was that. And the answer that was given after the independences in Africa, which was very important for France, because France, its model of a development was African, was engineering will help us.
I see.
Engineering will do the job.
Yeah.
That's why you have, and for the Venezuelans also, by the way, that's why you have large schools of engineering that are created immediately. That's why the priority is given to heavy industry. That's also why you support very much everything that has to do with oil and with siderurgy and irons and basic industries. And it relates to economic.
But it is not what was a model of the development to court. For instance, Veblen in United States, showing that replacing explaining the crisis in 1925 by the power of the finance, and say if we replace engineers by this finance people, and we will save factories, and no, so it's not the model of development worldwide.
the model of development of the Americans is the large enterprise, the large corporation,
Ah, okay.
which is not the case in all these countries, which is the state.
I see.
The
I see.
driving force of development in Africa after the independence in all the countries is the state.
Estate. Okay, okay.
And the large companies are French in the French colonies, are English in the English companies, are German in the German colonies. You see? So you somehow the independentists had to get rid of or collaborate with the big enterprises that were foreign companies.
Yeah, yeah.
So there is a sort of misunderstanding between the Americans, who are, after the Second World War, because of the anti-communist policies, very generous towards development countries. The money given by the US
Marshall Plan.
after the Marshall Plan and until the 1980s, the amounts of funding given to development in this book called Escape from Empire, Alice Amsden shows it very clearly. Until the 80s, there was a sort of growth, steady growth of support to development. USAID was created because of that. The one that Trump destroyed last month.
Yeah. So, hopefully not yet. I mean, now there is a court case.
Yeah, there's a court case.
Yeah.
And everything changes in the 80s with the growth of neoliberal policies. But until the 1980s, beginning 90s, development was the story of how you organized the state policies to promote more production, more agriculture, and so on and so forth. The Americans have had the bounty of the big growth. I mean, the books of Chandler on the economic history of the US is quite clear on that. Until 1980s, 87, 80, 60, there's no big cooperation. After the big railway companies and the big chemical companies and all that happens in the late 19th century. And the age of capital comes late in the US at the moment when Europe becomes an imperialist power.
I see. So French Empire.
The French Empire, yeah. The Berlin conferences in 1980, 84 or something like that. And so they distribute Africa among them. So capitalist, colonial, imperialist force of Europe is created when the US was not at all imperialist and created its own capitalism, which was much more autonomous. So they do have a different vision and that's also the misunderstanding of the beginning of the Second World War. Why the US was so late to come into the war, into the Second World War, because Ford was first of all a fascist, but apart from that, the force there is its own development of its own industry, and that's precisely the model they want to diffuse in the world.
I see.
Which is not exactly what the Europeans wanted.
Yeah.
For maintaining their power over the colonial countries, which made them rich. We forget how much money was earned from the European countries by the colonial exploitation. So this is also the dark history that an institution like Oxfam cannot escape. So we try to see what happens in India, which is a very curious thing for us. And Vivi Krishna worked with us on that, and Kapil Raj also working on the Brahims. And James, by the way, Kapil is probably one of the best historians of science we ever had in France. And he began working a bit with us at that time. That was also why we were interested in this comparative world. That's when you had finished your PhD, you, Sari, on the engineers in Syria, and we were very much interested by this growth of professions in the Middle East. Because for us it was like models of development. The professional organizations were so engineer, pharmacists, medics Anne-Marie Moulin was studying medics,
And Pasteur, yeah.
and Pasteur. Longness was studying
All sort of
all sort of
account,
professional,
yeah, professional, yeah.
professional organizations in Syria, in Lebanon, and all the Middle East. So that's what we brought together into this program that was organized by Roland Vast in the 90s. So when I work in Mexico on this innovation projects and teaching on that, at the same time we have this program we're working on the dynamics of research in the developing countries, in the developing world. And we finished this cycle. I'd say that's also a period where we brought in Ali Elkens, because it's the beginning of the dark 10 years of Algeria. And he escapes from death, certain death if he had stayed in Algeria.
Absolutely.
He comes to France and nobody wants him. And he comes to work with Orstom, which was very happy to have this person who was an extraordinary sociologist.
Absolutely.
He had this fantastic intuition by studying the early making of the National Front, Liberation Front in Algeria, saying that development had two versions. One version was patrimonialists, saying that we need religion and education.
Yeah.
And the other one was technocratic, saying we need industry and engineering.
Yeah, exactly.
And the two were fighting because they were different political bands.
Yeah.
And
then two elite formations.
And two different elite formations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's probably the origin of the Civil War.
Yeah.
The deep origin, the deep root of the Civil War in Algeria. There's many other reasons, of course. But this scheme was the scheme that Ali wrote at that time when he was with us in the program. And we had finished with Arnoldo Pirela and also Rafa Rengifo and Alexis Mercado, also in Venezuela. We had finished a large comparative work on what we were calling technological learning. So technological learning, this idea that you don't transfer technology, you adapt it, you adopt it. You create it yourself inside the companies. Your own way of doing things in a company makes you learn how to use the technology. And so there, if you have a good opportunity, you can integrate the new technology, but you can't sell it. And all this discourse about selling technology by technology transfers, it was just rubbish, because in fact, if the companies were unable to absorb, you can't have transfers. That's what, more or less the scheme. It's the same idea with what we were thinking about development. Development is something that's very internal. It's based on cultural and political values. And political institutions, not so much on if you have a lot of money or not. You have countries that were not very rich, that were doing quite well, and others not, and it was because of the institutional setup, not because of the money.
And this is one of the major conclusions of our book,
Exactly.
that there is no correlation between GDP per capita and the investment R&D.
Exactly.
Research and development. Yeah.
Exactly.
So,
and the European Union, at some point, they also understood that importance. So they said, okay, instead of just giving loans to our partners around us, and what is around us, mainly the Mediterranean countries, giving just loans is useless. We need to have some sort of agreements with them. So in the agreements for what is research, for the part of research, the European, in the framework programs, they had funded something called STD, which was Science Technology Development. By the way, it was also the name of our team. It changed many times name, but this was one of the names we had. And STD was, we did the first survey of beneficiaries of STD, so we had 1,000 interviews there, and we finished that when I came back from Mexico. This project, we did also the bibliometrics, and used the bibliometrics to study the evolution of research. And this gave us sort of, the team as a team, not only me,
Yeah.
the team as a team gave us a sort of overview of what research is about in different countries. At the late 90s, Roland got a big contract with the French Minister of Foreign Affairs on where is science in Africa?
Yeah. Right.
What happens with science in Africa? And Africa had lived 10 years of disastrous structural adjustment policies that were
That's
imposed
true.
by the World Bank. And at that very period, the World Bank had also a discourse that was very, very...
And persistent of authoritarianism at that time
Yes, also.
of Africa.
Also. And it has a discourse about universities, which is, you don't really need universities in Africa. You don't really need research in Africa. What you need is technical people. What you need is secondary education. So the return on investment on education is zero when you fund universities, where it's very high if you fund secondary schooling.
And vocational training.
Yeah,
most
exactly.
probably.
So the only good thing about the whole discourse there, the only good thing is that
Who
there was
propagated this discourse?
a Greek called Zacharopoulos who was working in the World Bank.
Oh my God.
Now, in fact, it was really the ideology of the
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
World
yeah.
Bank.
It was the discourse of
It
that
was-
time.
It was a discourse, and
But
but
is
the
it- is-
economics of that is this guy.
Ah, yeah,
Zakharov,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Who was professor, I think, in Oxford or Cambridge,
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. It's a pure casualty.
Yeah,
I mean, being a Greek is not the important thing.
So we have a bad Greek and good,
good Greek, yeah, exactly.
I'm interviewing the good Greek.
Yes, there's something like that. No, but I think, but I mean, his argument seems on the paper very true, but it doesn't take into account how things really are setting, how institutions are created.
Yeah.
And I think this is the central message, no? So if you destroy the one of the things we found out with the program on research in Africa, which was really the result of 4 or 5 years of work in different. We worked with cases in 13 countries. We didn't publish everything. We couldn't publish everything. Research was not finished in many of the countries. I mean, it was a complicated program. But one of the things that was very persistent in many countries was that you don't have research if you don't have some institution that are that can maintain themselves even if they don't have a lot of funding. So what happened in the years of the structural adjustment is that professors at the university didn't get paid for many years, 4, 5, 6 years, many years, but they created consultancies, companies on the side, and they never quit from being professors at the university. Because the important thing was to be a professor at the university.
Yeah. It's a symbolic capital.
It's you can say that. And it
Honorative title.
And you never know. And since the institution does not push you away and continues to maintain even a symbolic salary of $10 or $20, something like that, you still are professor of the university. So you belong to a sort of elite of the country. Being teacher in a university was a very high title, and that's one of the things that changed afterwards. But after the 90s, at the early 2000s, in Africa, and this is very clear, all these people were back. All these people that had been impossible to do their classes, to give classes, who have seen the decay of the university, what we have called the institutionalization of research and of the universities. Suddenly, they not suddenly, but very quickly, they came back to recreate their institution. A country like Niger, for me, was a very good example. I had a PhD student, Khadijatou Mahoussama, who did her thesis on that, and it was very impressive because it's one of the poorest countries of the world, but its university was maintained all these years working and trying to train people and send them in a foreign country and trying to orient some of the teaching into very interesting areas of teaching. This effort was very conscious, very well organized. Some people had a very strict idea what they wanted to do. Tijani Alou, for example, was a guy who was very important into that. Something similar happened to Tunisia. And you find the places where you find some stability becoming very visible in the 2000s is when there is this stabilization also of the institutional working of.
And in that time, of course, you have Codestria, a council for social science in Africa, which play a role on.
But really, the crisis were hit very hard. Codestria.
Yeah, okay.
Codestria was really hit very hard.
Okay.
One of the interesting things, for example, in French-speaking Africa, was that they had created an institution, I think it was in the 1968, called CAMES, the Council for University, for Higher Education in Madagascar and French-speaking Africa. And CAMES is, I think, 13 or 14 countries that belong to it. Today, when you have a diploma of physics or chemistry or a master in one of the disciplines or even in the social sciences, you can ask to be validated by CAMES.
Oh, okay.
So it's a board that does a sort of certification that you have a real diploma and that diploma has value. You have people that have on the cards, presentation cards, it says, Mr. So-and-so, master in physics, CAMES. So it's validated by CAMES. This kind of ideas come precisely from the periods of the institutionalization. If we don't want to have again the same disaster, we need to have a way of validating and
a quality control.
the quality control of our diplomas.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a very new idea in Africa. It's the early 2000s that it comes.
Okay.
And I would say that in Europe also it comes in these years.
Yeah.
Even though we won't accept that like that. No, why? We had excellent research. Yeah, you had excellent researchers and all that. But as a institutional endeavor,
and the whole Bologna process was to standardize and to mainstream
it has
what
also,
the meaning of a diploma, of a licence, maîtrise.
And it had something which we never liked in France, for example, which was that you could do bits and parts in one country and bits and parts of a diploma in another country. So there was a sort of market of units, of value units of students. That was really the Bologna process. But it gave a sort of model on how you organize the university.
I would like to continue chronologically with your trajectory.
So after the 90s, I go to China.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to hear because this is really.
I'm involved, in fact, in a small circle of sociologists working on technology. So this small circle, there's one guy there who's Chinese.
Yeah.
And the reason is a connection that has a colleague with Guangzhou, with the city of Guangzhou. And I come back from Mexico, and then my colleague who had that connection with Guangzhou told me, you met this young guy, they're Chinese, and I'm going to China to see them. Why don't you come with me? So I said, yeah, why not? So I went, and I was fascinated.
Yeah.
So this is 1999?
1999, yeah. So
1999.
last year
of the century.
Century,
something like that. And Guangzhou is totally like it had been bombed. Like if they had bombed because it was holes and constructions.
My God.
And the whole city was a sort of havoc. There was a new metro line that was constructed, which exists today. And there was a sort of gigantic constructions everywhere. And we organized a small meeting with our Chinese colleagues who wanted to have exchanges with France in a very big university in the south of China. So things were very interesting. So we were visiting things, lots of things. It's very interesting because we spent, I think, 10 or 15 days with my French colleague, and we came back. He was used because he had been in China 1 or 2 times, but for me it was really a surprise, and it was so much different. And the Chinese colleague comes to see me at the end and says, I think I heard that you are in a French institution that sends its researchers in foreign countries. I said, yes. Okay. How can we bring you here? I said, first of all, you have to convince me. and then
I will convince their institution. But just convince me.
I'll convince my institution. And we had a lot of exchange after that travel. And really what convinced me was something that I shared with my French colleague. We wanted to see how something that was right in the right continuation of what I had done in Latin America. How companies acquire a technology and develop it internally.
Okay.
And at that time, we
did R&D. Not this,
technology, whatever technology.
Technology.
Small companies that know nothing, how do they become companies with a technological capital and with knowledge on the technology? Where do they get it? How do they get it? And that interests a lot of people. So it was the question was really interesting. And then I said, locally, how do you do research in China? And that's the secret key that my friend had. We are going to create a French-Chinese Center for Research. So I created that center with my colleague and with the Chinese colleagues. We had a lot of institutional difficulties setting it up. It was not that easy. But anyway, we created that center, and our partner was someone who had created an institution called called the Institute for the Development of Guangdong, the province that englobes Guangzhou and the South China. And at that time, if you were looking at the statistics, 60% of exports of China were coming from this region.
Wow.
So understanding what was happening there was a little bit like understanding why China is
successful
going to grow.
in as expert.
Was going to grow. That was because it was growing, but slowly. We are between 2000 and 2004. Let's say. The big growth is just after that. After 2004. I think 2004 is a magic year. By the way, one day I'll write about that. But at that precise moment, we set up this center, and that allows us to see more than 40 companies, small and medium companies, and sometimes very small ones, villages of industries, small clusters of companies, something that was studied also in Latin America, and how this worked. I also studied with a student of mine the policy of innovation in the south of China, and so I spent some 4 years there, totally integrated into the university system of China, speaking very bad Chinese. By the way, they don't speak only Mandarin, they speak also Cantonese, so it's complicated to learn the language anyway. So, but I had always with me students of the level of a master degree doing field work with us, and the only way to enter into the companies was to go through official channels.
Of course.
You couldn't do that by yourself. We tried it once. We tried it with my students who knew how to do things. So I said, okay, instead of asking...
And Chinese students.
Chinese students. Instead of asking previously, I don't know, the mayor of a small city how to go and visit textile companies or whatever companies in this or that place, let's go because we know 1 or 2 of the bosses of the company. So we did that. And the first field work I had done in a city called Chueco. And in Chueco, we tried to go with my students there, and we visited one, two, a third company, and that was it. Suddenly someone appeared, said, "Oh, you are the ones who came last year also and visited us. That's very nice. Let's come with us, and we'll offer you some food. Let's have a
And
dinner,
tea.
and bye-bye tomorrow."
Yeah.
And that's all. So that was the end of it. You can't do field work if you're not into a sort of protection by the institution that helps you. But curiously enough, I found out, and I'm not the only one, that you could ask whatever questions you wanted once you were inside the companies.
Okay.
Strangely enough, you had a lot of freedom into asking things. And you were not going to talk about politics, so the danger was zero for politically.
So there is a political commissar handle you to enter.
Always.
Enter. But once you enter, it will be easier. I noticed that you didn't publish much about China. Yes? Or,
I didn't publish a book.
Yeah.
Well, I had a disaster. I was writing the book after when I came from China. And then suddenly, I had a student, a French student, who was speaking very well Chinese, and with whom I began to work on science policy in China. And unfortunately, we had worked 6 months together. We were preparing his plan. He had a grant to do his PhD research and partly with me under my supervision, and he had a supervisor at Sciences Po and me. I had begun writing that with him, talking about it, and he died in an accident.
no way, my God. This is, yeah.
And I don't know, unconsciously, maybe it was a stupid idea, I stopped writing that thing on China. I gave him the title of the book I wanted to give, which was China Innovation Incorporated, it's called, China Innovation Inc.
Hey.
So we published a book as a homage to this guy.
Okay.
As if it was he who did the book, no? He created the book. Anyway, no, we published 2 or 3 things that were interesting and very much used. I'm not a specialist of China.
Yeah.
And I never pretended to be a specialist of China. So it's very difficult to write on such a narrow thing without being supported by people who have the legitimacy to work as a specialist of China. But I never lost the contact when I was there with, first of all, Europeans working on China, and I've never been told that what I do or say or write is out of that. And then what we were studying is a phenomenon that happened in one particular period of time.
Okay, so China,
come back
and it's time we talk about esteem.
Because
this is your
esteem when I'm in
first. What is esteem? Is
the last 3 months? The last 3 months I'm in China. I have a telephone call from my boss at IRD, who is Roland Vast, who tells me, you know what, the Commission wants us to present a project on science policy in the Arab countries. Why Arab countries? Well, because of this politique de voisinage, which is policy of vicinity of the European Union. And there's a big plan to organize things on the Mediterranean. And so they want to know how it's going on. And that's the framework I was telling you before. And that was the framework on science policy. So, are you in? I said, I have to finish my work in China. No, it's now. We present a project and then you see.
Now or nothing?
Now, nothing. We don't do it. So I said to Roland, okay, let's see. So I drafted the first version, writing in Beijing. I stayed 3 months in Beijing writing this project. And I could not leave because of family issues and so on. And at the same time, we write this project with Roland, exchanging my email. And I come back to France and we finish the last details. At the beginning of 2000, it must be 2004, something like that. Or 4, I think. And they gave us the project, effectively. There was nobody else who really answered to this call. It was not a research project, it was what was called an SSA, a support action. So
it's more mapping.
The idea was a mapping of research systems.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, we are going to do a mapping of research systems in 10 countries, more or less, no? So Maghreb, 3 Maghreb French-talking countries. The only one which was not included was Libya, but Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and there was Egypt, of course, which was not a success. Lebanon, Jordan, and then there was a big discussion, do we include or not Israel? And they said no, because it's different and so on. So we said, no, we don't do the project with Israel, otherwise it will never be feasible. I mean, we're not in the United Nations. No, well, either we do a project that's feasible or not. And we have only one partner, which is OST, which they do statistics at that time. On science.
What is OST?
The Observatoire des Sciences et des Techniques, which is a sort of observatory that does statistics on science.
Where is it?
It was at that time an independent institution in France, in Paris. Okay. And they were very good at that work. And so the deal is IRD, my team, me being leader of the project, and it was the first time I was leader of a European project, by the way, and OST people as partners. So how do we, the money was then given to us to distribute to each country. They said, but we're not going to do a project by project country, we're doing topics by topics. So we're going to study social sciences there, and natural sciences there, and history there, and so on and so forth. And so we began to find specialists in each of these topics. I gathered a small team around me, and at the end of 4 years, we had done the work. More or less. So in 2000, I think we finished in 2007, something like that. And in 2007, we finished the work, and then this project allowed us to have a sort of report depending on the country, but we did something very important on social sciences with the Abdulaziz Library in Morocco. We did, it was the first time that it was used in that way. We did the reports on history in Morocco, on science policy, on agricultural sciences. In Lebanon, there was Jacques Gaillard who did the interviews with the CNRS of Lebanon and some universities. That's when I come and meet you.
Absolutely. And you hire me for a small background paper.
A background paper on NGOs or something like that.
And no, on science.
On social sciences.
So.
And that's how we discuss. And we try very much in Syria to have. We had a report on history of science in Syria. We had
because there is a good research team in Aleppo and in Damascus who work on history of science.
That's precisely,
particularly Arab science.
Exactly, that was the idea. There was also the Palestine, an institution that does not exist anymore, I think. Something like Council of Science of Palestine, but it was diasporic people working in Palestine that had this. A very interesting institution, by the way. But, I mean, that was it. You had also something on universities we did also with a French guy who had just finished his thesis on that, and Abahir al-Sakha.
Sakha. And Romani.
And Romani was the French guy.
No, actually, what
And I think
how
all
I
the
s-
all the people who were working
how,
on universities or science institutions were mobilized by his team.
how I see esteem as a someone in, but at the same time observer like you of knowledge production. I would say it was a very important moment to reflect on what institution, who produce research, what are the hurdle of producing research, who are the founder of research. All this is a small, all these fundamental questions has been really raised in a one big project, which and I do remember beyond the report, the beautiful report that you wrote in the end. It was a workshops where we met. It was a few many. I mean,
There
some
was many.
yeah. Because I
Many.
do
There were
remember
at
in
least
Lebanon alone, it was two
two or three. Yeah,
yeah,
three
one
at
in
least.
social science, one
Exactly.
more general,
Yeah.
etc. In Tunisia, I do remember one
We did three in Tunisia.
yeah.
Three in Tunisia, at least four in Morocco.
Yeah.
No, in every country. The
So,
only place
so
we
really,
couldn't really.
Rigas, you are really pioneer. I mean, in this region, this is why I feel we owe you a lot. I mean, this kind of opening this important topic. I mean, initiated.
What was I think one of the important things you just mentioned it is the fact that you were discussing about these topics for the first time. I remember when Hossein Al-Fawi, who 10 years,
yeah, Allah yarhamu.
10 years ago,
Late.
10 years before, he had begun studying that in Algeria, and he could not work
Engineers,
because he could not work because there was so many difficulties in doing the job, and and he was like, he had to teach, he had to ask permission. He was fed up. He went to Canada.
Exactly.
He stopped his work. He abandoned. He was fed up. I remember I had invited him in China to come and present the work. That was much before his team. So he was fed up, and he was, by the way, he was a student working who had worked with Ali Al-Kans.
Absolutely. And Muhammad bin Kurna. These two who really, they work with you and with Ali Al-Kans and
you see that these people, they were nobody was really discussing about this topic. What the publication, how does it work? How does the publication system work? Because the excuse that our language is different is just an excuse. Then the way it circulates, the way it produces, who does produce, why Insaniyat exists and never stopped producing when many other journals never could follow more than 3 issues. No, after 3 issues they stop, and so these discussions had never happened before. I had another discussion in Algeria, for example. They began saying, so we can digitize all the publication of the PhDs and master degrees, and they stopped. And I said, why did you? Well, because we began really doing it. And so what? So we found that there were so many PhDs that were copying PhDs. Plagiarism. We better not do that work, no? And so there was a discussion about plagiarism for the first time.
Absolutely.
And this was as outcomes of the project.
Yes. So you finish STEAM. You cooperate with the National Council for Research in Lebanon.
They come. In fact, they come tell me, why we very much like this STEAM project. Why don't you come to Lebanon? And then say, what for? To create a science indicators unit or an observatory with indicators of science in Lebanon. It must not be very difficult. There was a guy who believed in that very much, who was Hassan Sharif, who was counselor. He was the counselor to Muin Hamze, who was Secretary General. And so because of his team, we knew each other, and I said, okay, I'll try. So discussing it, my institution said, "Why, you're going to become counselor of a government of Lebanon? What's that?" And I said, "No, that's not what that, but that's exactly what they proposed, you know." They said, "Well, yes, maybe you're right." So if I do a research project with Sari Hanafi, would that work? No, I will do whatever you want as a research project, but not a counselor of the government. So okay, let's split it in two. No, because I'll try to work for the National Council, and I'll work with Sari, because we could, I think we could work out a good research project in the American University of Beirut. And so my institution said, okay, they validated that, which was not really the way we do usually. But anyway, there was this demand, and because it was Lebanon, I think it had been another country.
This is the weakness of France.
Yes.
The Lebanon.
Yeah. The weakness of France with Lebanon. I think that played a very big role. A very big role. And Moin Hamza knew very much how to negotiate with the French. But he went to...
They didn't tell you that you need to work with a Francophone institution?
No,
They're very good.
No.
Very good.
There was no obligation to work with whomever. And I said, I'm going to work with AUB. And okay, why not? But set up a project. So I did a project. The project was validated, and so in fact the book that we produced is in part the result of this project. The project was to study just how in each institution there was research in each university. Because there was very little research. That's what we had found out with this team. But probably there was much more than what was really said, because there was a lot of publications at that time. And it was all right and growing. So it was interesting to study this dynamic. Why is it growing? After all, without having really a recognition for research in the universities. Because apart from AUB, USG, and one or two others, the Lebanese university had very good research centers, nobody else was really keen on doing. It's certainly not the 30 universities at that time.
And in this book, we study paradigms on social science. We study the question of language. We studied
the issues of how different
activities of research between professional, policy,
and also how, for example, how, because we had the Arab revolutions happening at the same time.
Who cites whom?
Who cites whom? When you are French, when you are French speaking, when you are English speaking, when you are Arab speaking, how does that thing work? No? Yeah, and I was very much sensible to this topic that really was the topic that you raised, Sari, the topic of language. You were the one who insisted on doing a specific focus, a specific chapter on that. And I think it's, I found out that I had this discussion 10 years ago in Latin America with English and Spanish for people working in Latin America. And it's still a discussion today with Fernanda Bagel in Argentina working on this topic. So this is a very important topic, and I think that we found something that we didn't expect at all.
Absolutely.
In general, my surprise was very big in what happened. We also, I remember we had one of the first times we presented some of the results of the research we did was in French, in a meeting with French-talking people in Lebanon, in Beirut. And we presented that, and somebody told us, but what you are saying there is wrong. I said, what's wrong? We did some survey, we presented interviews, the protocol with which we did the research, and one of the results was that professors at the university published much less than what we expected, and in particular in social sciences. But they said they publish a lot in newspapers, like op-eds. They didn't publish any more op-eds than what we knew, which was very little, very few. And so we said, no, I'm sorry, they talk a lot, but they don't publish a lot.
Exactly.
And I was probably the only one who could say that, because nobody had ever dared to say that. No.
You know, Rigas, 2 weeks ago, Fuad Murad, who commissioned from us a study about broken cycle between
Yes.
research and society, came to visit me at EUB and remind me when he was invite me to Jordan to present our book. Actually, it was
Exactly, the
published,
book, yes.
and I don't think you were there,
No.
and I was bloody insulted by etc. And he told me he do remember how patient I was to convince those who really they didn't like some of the result. They didn't like that you say in some countries you have a big funding like this and this small
Very small
income,
in
etc.
production,
And Tunisia have a small funding and
A lot of production,
a lot of production, etc. So some of them, they especially in the Gulf, they didn't like at all and attacked me. So it was.
But you have also you answered patiently, because we I know that whatever we wrote in that book has been verified 10 times, and we have, because we discussed a lot with a lot of people to do this book.
Yeah.
And it's probably the book that gathers all that was since esteem work, in fact. Yeah. So I think
And it's very quoted, by the way. It's very cited. Look to the Google. It's almost half.
in Scholar,
Yeah. It's really it was success story. Now I will ask you, because we run out of and still have 2-3 gestalt questions, but I would like to ask you the book written in 2015, published in 2016. Now we are talking 10 years later. I know, Rigas, you still supervise thesis about the Arab world. You still have a conversation about silly people like me and others, etc. So, if we decide tomorrow to update this book, Knowledge Production in the Arab World, The Impossible Promise, what 2-3 things you think have been changed in the Arab world in the last 10 years?
I think the working conditions have changed. That's the first thing. So salaries are not the same levels. They are very unequally distributed in very countries.
Yeah.
The rise of the Gulf countries is real.
Qatar foundations,
Saudi
and
Arabia.
United Arab Emirates,
Arabia.
and Saudi Arabia, absolutely.
It produces a lot of research.
City of Abdel Aziz, city of technology, science.
I'm not so certain that the cities of technology produced a lot, but it's something that also failed in Tunisia at the very end. The clusters of technology they wanted to create, and so on and so forth. But I do think that the research part has grown very much, and it's become legitimate to have a research unit in universities, in even smaller universities, if you find the sufficient funding to do it. What also has changed, and it's not only the Arab countries, is that private funding has grown a lot for research. If you work on the environment, on biosphere, on diseases, on this kind of global topics, you can get funding and create a research unit much more easier than 10 years ago.
Not in the Arab world.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. Actually, in the Arab world, benefiting from private foundations, etc., outside. But I don't see still, if you like, private foundations are really interested on funding research.
I would.
They
For
do.
me, it's a
They do
research
award.
topic.
They
I
Showman, for instance, award or something.
Yes, there's very few maybe Arab foundations, but there's a lot of private foundations elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. I'm talking about
That-
Arab.
that- yeah.
Okay.
So there's probably not more Arab foundations today than there were 10 years ago. That's
That's
not
true.
the change. The change is with the big foundations that fund everywhere in Latin America and in Africa and everywhere, that fund much more work. I think Wellcome Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, or BMG, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they're probably very much dominant in Anglo-speaking world. They are very much into things funded by the European Union or parallel to that. BMG is parallel to every program funded by the World Bank. I believe that the position of the Arab countries is very different if you're from the Maghreb or from Middle East. It's very, very different, and the influence of the Gulf countries is probably also felt very differently. Although I know that a lot of experts, for example, of Qatar Foundation, come from Tunisia, from Egypt, Morocco, a lot, yeah. A lot. I mean, this geopolitics of research funding has changed a lot. The other thing is that everywhere, and not only in the Arab countries, universities have become the main focus of research, which was not the situation 1 century ago. When you end the Second World War, there's a lot of countries that decide to create research councils and institutes of research that are independent from the universities. Whereas today, you'll find as a first idea to consolidate the research inside the university. And this probably changes a lot. The difference is we still are in a world of authoritarian governments, so that didn't change.
Unfortunately.
And universities are still under threat continuously under such regimes. And I believe what was we identified at that time as being a real break against, I mean, it stops the growth process. It still works in that way. I suppose it works in the same way. I would say also that the relation to the US and the BRICS. I mean, the general geopolitics of globalization is changing also. What's exactly
You know now you have at least 2-3 countries, Arabic countries, part of the BRICS.
exactly?
Yeah.
And
Saudi
so
Arabia.
yes, exactly. So this different thing still has little impact into research, but it begins to have impact, for example, in the production of in the circulation of publications, which is very important for research.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would rather study the working conditions, the actual working conditions, and the publication system if I had to do the same.
Okay.
The same thing. And then something that you know as well as me, Sari, topics of research are also political topics. So the ones who
Absolutely.
emerge from a new situation. So what happens after 10 years of civil wars, the Middle East in the turmoil, after Gaza, what happens? So it's not only because of an interest in international relations, is that affects also the way things are decided internally. And I would say also that there is this logic of having a valued quality research. There's a conscious that you need to have that if you want to have an argument. You can't it's just science is not just opinions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so but it has a cost. So you need to pay that cost if you want to have science. There is a big conscious about that. And I believe when I began working in the early 2000s, coming to the Arab countries, there was no such conscious. People telling that was some professors at the university, or some researchers, but it was not a common opinion.
Absolutely.
It was you could. I don't want to be to dismiss saying no, there was not. But you would. There was no institutionalization of evaluating things, of validating things. So you publish, it's okay. You publish rubbish, it's okay. You publish true things, it's okay. I mean, there was
absolutely.
everything was on the same level.
Absolutely.
And universities did not really play the role in saying no. We spent a lot of time and energy to prove that things that we write there.
Our audience may interest in particularly you, Rigas, being anchored in Institute of Research for Development. This institution that you describe a colonial moment and post-colonial moment, if you like. If now you look about the whole if you like, this post-colonial moment, which at least 40 more half century. I mean, how the choice of topic outside of France is driven by eager that in order to sell our product, French product, we want to know, and to what the percentage, if you like, of a drive that no, we want really to help, if you like, the emerging science systems. I'm talking, for instance, about your topic, and create a real partnership, if you like. So to
I would say that depends in France.
Yeah. I'm not talking about you, Rigas. I'm talking you with
as
with,
an institution. Yeah,
at 2 months of your retirement.
Yeah.
I mean that.
I would say that IRD is a very strange institution that does not. That's very different from the other research institutions. We are less driven by what happens in France than what happens in the countries with which we work.
Okay.
We are more interested to be really on par with the researchers with whom we work in Senegal or in Côte d'Ivoire, in Mexico or Argentina or wherever, or India, than to correspond to the policy of the French in France. There's two things that drive us in IRD in particular that are very important. One is the magic word of partnership. We do partnerships, and more we do them with university people.
With
university
people.
With universities, with university units, research units. So we are tied by these agreements, and today it's very difficult to escape to what the agreement is saying. You cannot write an empty agreement. It's very complicated.
Okay.
You need to you won't spend your time do an empty agreement. So for us, since we work always in an agreement framework, so that obliges us for a certain. So this is one thing. The second thing is, so I think I worked mostly answering to questions that were raised from my partners. Mostly. The 2 or 3 times I did it on my own were very short periods of time and not very productive either. So what's productive is being in a research team with a real cooperation in terms of collaboration with other people. This is what drives the research. And I think it's true in social sciences and natural sciences in the same way. What differentiates us is the equipments. We have less heavy equipment, although I believe more expensive. Our equipments, the lack of equipment that characterizes us is more expensive than having an equipment. Because you need to pay for the travels, for the subsistence, for the energy and effort to do all the work of writing things, analyzing them, and this is not a machine that you push a button. So the investment is maybe less at the beginning, but it's most costly on the long run. Anyway, that's one thing. The partnership is one. The other thing is this world with the climate change and biodiversity is the main topics of ERD. It always had been the main topics.
I see.
Since it's very earth
To sit in environment,
since the first year of its creation. The environment. So oceanographers and biologists of plants and specialists of health at the global scale and whatever of these things, they'll have work for all their life and for the generations to come. So we are now people who are in topics that are more linked to the market. We are not at all linked to the market. We are very far away from the market. People who are linked to the market, they try to sell something. CIRAD, which is an institution working on tropical environments that produces plants and sells them.
Okay. Or
it's different.
Or INRA about agriculture and etc.
CIRAD is on agriculture also. That's why I'm saying working. It's like INRA working in foreign countries.
Okay.
So, but the proximity to the market is what makes the difference, I think.
I see.
And we ERD are very, very far away from the market.
No, and actually, it's just
and
as somebody
enough, our budget, for example, the budget of my research unit, which I directed for 6 years. We receive around, more or less, 200,000 euros per year from the institution to run projects, apart from our salaries.
200,000.
200,000, but our budget is 2.5 million. So the rest, 10% is the budget from the institute, and 90% comes from our contracts that we have. Who pays for us? The United Nations, the World Bank, NGOs, strong funders, private funders. We have a variety of institutions that are funding, and also we participate to international networks, and we are known on the topics that we work upon as being among the best in the world. So we earn that money because of our reputation of doing good research. The budgets we get, which are 10 times more than what we would get if we were just staying in our office, correspond to field work. Maybe.
Exactly.
So our capacity to analyze either quantitatively or not, we have invented methods. For example, statistical use of biographies. We're one of the best teams on that. We have invented methods, and I'm talking as a research unit now. I'm not talking of ERD. ERD is bigger, so it's different. But so for the years to come, if they continue on the same topics, my colleagues, they will always have work and always will be funded.
Okay. I cannot end this podcast without asking you, when would you write your memoir? I mean, I think Rigas, you have an amazing an amazing life. I looked to your blogs. I mean, between cuisine and recipe for food coming from all over the world, from your amazing general culture, where you always connect culture to research and to field work. I really expect that you produce a memoir.
Thank you very much.
And
I'll take that as an encouragement.
It will be so bitty, because I do remember all the dinners where you tell all these anecdotes from Mexico to China, from Brazil to Lebanon to Algeria to Tunisia.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. So. Thank you so much
thank you very much, Sari, for this invitation. And I'm glad to have It changes with your persons who hear the podcast whenever they want.
Yeah. So thank you for listening to us, and hopefully to see you in the next episode of our podcast, Connecting Social Science to Society. And goodbye.